few days ago, I showed you this tremendous game between Praggnanandhaa and Rapport. And here Richard played knight takes d5 and sacrificed the whole piece, but somehow managed to just get this wonderful initiative and won a splendid game. Just fantastic. And I said at the time, it reminded me of some of Kasparov's games playing the King's Indian. And lo and behold, Kasparov tweeted, or X'd, whatever we say, wonderful game by Rapport. And I thank him for refreshing some fond memories of my own games with knight takes d5. Similar to what I played against Jan Timman in two games, Moscow 1981 and Linares 1992. As Miracle Max said in The Princess Bride, the King's Indian is only mostly dead. An ironic comment by Kasparov on the King's Indian because basically he gave it up. He'd had enough of it after a bit. But he scored some amazing wins with it. And what I'd like to do is look at both those games that he mentioned. Both played against Jan Timman. So in this video, I'm going to show you the game that he played against Timman from 1981 in Moscow. And what I find interesting about these two games is that with Timman, he met a worthy opponent because Timman never backed down. He was really uncompromising. And of course, that produced some mighty clashes between the pair. Okay, so let's have a look. So Moscow 1981, Timman playing white. This was played in the 5th round. In the very first round, Kasparov had won a beautiful attack with the King's Indian against Belyavsky. Also in this Zaimish variation. So at that time, the Zaimish was really feared. So the idea is very simple. The bishop comes to e3, potentially queen d2, and white sets up for a kingside attack by usually advancing the G and H pawns. Very similar to the Yugoslav attack in the Dragon, Sicilian Dragon, and various other openings like the Pit. And at this time in the 80s, this was really a feared weapon. Spassky won some very nice games with it as white. Even earlier than this, actually. So Kasparov plays knight c6. I mean, there are many ways of tackling the Zaimish variation. But at that time, this was, one of the, well, let's say it was the kind of cutting edge of theory then. In the first round, Belyavsky had played queen d2, and the game had gone like this, and then e5 and knight d4. Well, do you know what? I think I might show you that game another time because it's a fantastic game. But, okay, in this 5th round, Timman played knight e2, didn't play queen d2, but instead just transferred the knight straight away. So that just clears the way for the bishop to come out and potentially casting kingside, or maybe the knight is just going to transfer to b3. So as the knight has moved away from protecting d4, then Kasparov took the opportunity to play e5. And after d5, the knight leapt in, the Trojan horse leapt in on d4, supported by the pawn. Now, moves like this, if you give away your dark squared bishop like this is terrible. And in fact, there's a crushing move already, and that's knight takes e4, unmasking the bishop. And if queen takes, then you win the queen. But even if there wasn't a tactic, you just don't want to do that with white because it would leave all those dark squares too weak. So knight b3. And Kasparov decided to exchange off on b3. And queen takes b3. So it could be that Timman's preparing to castle queenside. It could be that he wants to simply advance with c5 and then play rook c1 and play in the traditional way down the c file. So really black has to react here. So, for example, knight d7 has been played here, and then f5, the usual stuff. But Kasparov played c5. And this was exchanged off. And then castles queenside. Well, in many ways, this is such a typical King's Indian position. Black structure is pretty dodgy. Look at that pawn there. You know, it might be different with the bishop on e7, but with the bishop here, not great. So really to justify this weakness, black has to somehow generate counterplay. And, well, let's look at it from black's viewpoint. Look at white's king. Now, it should really be tucked in the corner, but it's a little bit exposed on c1, and that pawn on c4, you know, opens things out a bit. So if it goes wrong, then that could be nasty for the king. To play this kind of position, you need incredible energy with black. You know, if you sit back passively, it's not great. Now, this position was actually reached in the game Spassky-Korchnoi from their candidates match in 1968. Korchnoi played bishop e6, which kind of looks all right, but after queen a3, good move, hitting that weakling on d6, he came back with the knight, and Spassky launched the h-pawn, and I think with the knight on e8, this is just too passive. You might, even if you don't know the whole game, you might well recall the end of this game. Look at this position, and white to play and win. Queen h6, check. Beautiful. King takes, rook h1, and mate. But Kasparov improved on that. Instead of bishop e6, as Korchnoi played, he went queen e7. And that means that after queen a3, hitting this pawn, then the rook can simply come over to protect the d pawn. Now, Timman's next move, I think, is quite extraordinary. And I'll tell you what, this is evidence that really he has incredible confidence when he plays, you know. He played queen b6. I tell you what, he's got the minerals. He really has. To move your queen in like this, when if it goes just a little bit wrong, could mean that black unleashes an attack down here, gaining time against the queen. That is a really brave move. It's probably a good move, but you need to play very well. Kasparov played bishop b7 to cover that pawn, which is not a beautiful spot for the bishop, but actually it's necessary. I would like to play bishop e6, but actually white can simply take on c6. And if the rook comes over, then this can be taken. And if rook d8, then c5. And actually, the position opens up favourably for white. So bishop e7 necessary. g4. Very interesting. So Timman is preparing potentially to knock the knight out of the way, and that will discourage black from counterplay with this break d5. Of course, at the moment, this bishop on g7 is dead. It's just blunted by the pawn on e5. I mean, neither bishop looks good here. So Timman is really going for it. Interestingly, my computer recommends queen a5. That's a very nice move, actually. So it ducks out of trouble here. Blocks the a-pawn, which makes these pieces not look great. And it just kind of keeps control. It's a really nice move. But Timman played g4. He saw no reason to just shy away. And indeed, a5 is probably a good move here with this idea. And it prevents queen a5. But rook b8 played by Kasparov. Well, a very understandable move. h4. I mean, this is fantastic from Timman. just really uncompromising. Rook d8 was recommended by Kasparov in this book. Let me show you. Garry Kasparov on Garry Kasparov 1973 to 1985, part 1. But in fact, again, this move, Queen a5, is a very neat idea. And if d5, then bishop c5, white keeps control here. You can see this bishop isn't great. But rook c8 played by Kasparov, h5. And we've got a situation where if black doesn't break out, then white is just keeping control. And there is potential to switch to the king side. So for example, if knight d7, well, the queen could still go to a5 actually. But let's say this. In exchange, rook d2 is a nice move, covering b2, but also looking to switch to the h file. And black's king doesn't look great there. Black isn't generating counterplay. Let's go back. So this is the situation that Kasparov found himself in after h5. He's under pressure. He needs to find counterplay. d5 is a natural move. But as long as this isn't taken, then these the bishop and the rook remain locked in. So bishop c5 is nice. And an exchange, queen a5. And actually, white is in control here. So what did Kasparov play? Well, the move he played probably isn't very good. Nevertheless, it was just wonderfully random and was certainly good enough to confuse Timman. And probably all of us. Knight d5. So there's the echo with Rapport's knight takes d5. I mean, this is an incredible move. I would have loved to have seen Timman's face when this appeared on the board. Well, it can be taken by 3 different pieces. Timman played e takes d5. That got taken. Well, you can see how this has opened things up. It's opened the bishop up and the rook. But it is a whole piece. Timman played rook takes d5, which is such a positionally seductive move, actually, keeping control over these light squares. And in some ways, very typical of Timman. He brilliant positional strategic player, actually. C takes d5 was correct, was the best move for white. And Kasparov says it would have refuted the idea. But it's not easy to play a move like that when black has, for example, e4, opening up the long diagonal. And that seems to bring all black's pieces into play. The rooks are converging on c3 and b2 in connection with the bishop. Well, apparently white can defend this. So after this, okay, again this move queen a5. I mean, it looks terrifying. And you have to find moves like, this. This is best play, and then put the bishop back here. And yeah, it's hard to see how black is making progress. But Timman played rook takes d5. It's an attractive move because it keeps the c-file closed and it keeps control over some squares here, certainly over d5. Kasparov took the rook. Knight takes d5, hits the queen. So obviously if rook takes queen, knight takes queen, forking king and rook. So the queen has to move. Queen e6. So Timman's queen is attacked. And this is where the problems start, because if For example, queen takes a6, queen takes knight. You can see there's a pin. What about queen a5, protecting the knight? I mean, if white could hold this position with that beautiful knight on d5, then white is winning. But rook b5 is very unfortunate. Again, there's a pin, and then the knight drops. So Timman had to play queen a7. And queen takes knight, in this case, fails to queen takes rook. And if rook takes queen, pawn takes queen. And white is a piece up in an endgame. That's crucial. Okay, so what about this natural move e4 to open up the long diagonal? Well then, this knight fork is strong. Check. And knight takes rook. Although this looks terrifying, in fact, there's nothing doing here. The bishop holds this pawn, and now it's white's turn to attack. Bishop here, and the threat is to bring the rook down. And of course, white is a piece up. So what does black play? Well, Kasparov played rook a8, attacking the queen. Now, if there's a check, that's no good. Well, white's pieces are just too stretched here. They're not coordinating. Queen f6 is very strong, attacking here, and e4. And that is a very successful opening of the long diagonal. And what about queen e7? Queen takes knight again. This is the problem. So after rook a8, Timman had to play queen b7. And then Kasparov's only move to keep the initiative is rook b8. And you can see that they're repeating the position. So having repeated the position 3 times, a draw was declared. An honourable draw for both players. And, I mean, really, this is incredible. I mean, this was 1981, and these were the years when Kasparov was really coming through. He wasn't quite good enough to challenge Karpov yet, but it was clear that he was the coming man. So in 1981, he would have been 18 years old. He was just 18 when this one was played, or at least turning 18. And everyone could see that he was just going to be a superstar when he was making moves like this. In the next video, I'll show you the other game where knight takes d5 happened. From a game that he played against Timman, the same players from 1992, and that's absolutely fantastic. Little message for patrons. The next live broadcast exclusively for patrons will be on Friday, the 11th of July. And I'll be discussing the Sicilian Kalashnikov and strategy, and Sicilian strategy in general, and of course, taking all your questions that you might like to ask me. So do join me for that live on Friday evening, Friday the 11th of July. That's exclusively for patrons. If you're not a patron, then do sign up and you can join the broadcast. Thanks for watching.